this girl's standing in front of me, and she pulls a note out of pocket. She's like, here. What is this? It's my suicide note. What?
The second highest cause of death for teenagers is now suicide. This problem has become so great. The American Academy of Pediatrics
focus is to break the stigmas associated with mental illness.
Was found dead 3 days later. His suicide discovered by saw a 65%.
Our next guest inspires hundreds of people across Canada.
You tore up a record deal. You walked away from a successful music career.
Kids who may be suffering in
Robb Nash is now helping at-risk teenagers.
He has a stack of letters from students, and they're not thank you cards, they're not fan mail either.
So far, he's collected over 500 suicide notes.
In a tattoo parlor, he showed those students they also know tattooing the names of some of the kids he has reached on his arms. The Winnipeg-based musician has become a symbol for the anti-suicide movement after a tragic car accident almost took his life.
Getting some more names tattooed on my arm. It was an intense but beautiful moment when people started tagging me in photos on Instagram, Facebook, where they would take a lyric from a song and they'd tattoo it on their arm, often where they used to cut. And it just rocked me to the core that a song that I wrote or a quote from the show that was so personal to me was now being inked on somebody's body, you know, and each one of these names has a story. When people talk about mental illness, it seems they only talk about the suicides. When people talk about addiction, they only talk about the overdoses. I want to be able to show people, look, these are names of people that have, you know, those same struggles that you're having, and they're still here. It's been amazing, like, to be at an NHL game singing the anthem, and then I sit down in the audience and the person selling 50-50 tickets says, you know, like, can I see your arm? It's like, yeah. Show them my arm, and she goes, that's my daughter's signature, and she tears up. She says, I don't know how to thank you for the impact you've had on my daughter. Yeah, well, your daughter had an impact on me too. Those conversations keep me going, you know, remind me why I'm here, why I got a second chance. December 11th, super slippery roads. We're having a high school banquet for Christmas. And me and my friends decide, let's go get flowers for our dates. My friend, who just got his license, wasn't a very experienced driver, to say the least, wanted to drive. My best friend Ryan, I'm told, didn't want to get into the vehicle. He didn't trust the driver. And I convinced him to get in. Because truly, at 17 years old, you feel invincible. You don't think death is that far away. We go to the closest town and we buy flowers for our dates. We are on our way back to high school. It was fate, your accident. Fate means you have no choice. What happens, happens. You have no control over it. That made me angry. God did it to me because I'm a bad kid.
Some of the things that people say we know are well-intentioned. Well, I'm glad God gave you a second chance. And he heard that, I think, quite a bit. Those seem like encouraging words, but they weren't to him because he was grappling with the thought of, why did this happen to me?
I grew up in a small town called Kleefeld, Manitoba. It's a very conservative area known as the Bible Belt. Going to church, Sunday school every Sunday morning, church on Sunday afternoon. I had a very conservative family, you know, I was quite sheltered. You know, I was never allowed to watch a lot of mainstream movies, you know, mainstream music. The way it was taught to me was very much almost this fear of God. And not a fear in a good way, but kind of like this, you know, careful, lightning could strike at any moment. It's late afternoon. We're going way too fast on these icy roads. My friend is pulling out, passing all these vehicles. Apparently, I'm screaming, slow down, slow down. And we're less than 2 kilometers from the turnoff to our school. My friend pulls out to pass one last car, and there's a truck that just crossed the US border. We hit the brakes and start sliding. The semi-trailer ripped the trunk off of the back of the vehicle, and I was sitting behind the driver, and I fell back where the trunk used to be. Death is right there at any moment. None of my friends had injuries. One consistency, they say, is they didn't hear a thing. It was dead silent. There was a man who had just taken a first responders course, and he heard this loud crash. He couldn't see it, but he heard it. And he found me laying there, said I had no pulse, and he kicked into his training, doing CPR. And you can be cut wide open, but if your heart's not beating, you don't bleed. And I met with him a few years ago, and he said, "You were gone. You were dead." He knew my heart started beating when blood started pouring out of my head. And he tried to hold my skull together while waiting for the ambulance. His wife has told me that he couldn't move his arms for days because he was holding it so tight. Wondered if he had made a mistake. Was I gonna bleed out? Because he did that before the ambulance got there. They picked me up and they brought me to the closest hospital. From there, they called my family and said, "You should probably come to Winnipeg. Your son was in a very bad car accident and it does not look good."
It's like yesterday. I remember getting the call. Rob was in an accident and it doesn't look like he's gonna make it. They're transferring him to Winnipeg. I remember clearly it was a bad snowstorm, and I picked up Mom and whipped off to the city, which is an hour drive under normal conditions. The drive to the hospital that night was quiet because you don't know what you're gonna go into. So what decisions you're gonna have to make, all those things. We were expecting a dead person on the stretcher.
He had tubes coming out of his head. He was not conscious. It was horrible seeing him lay there. I mean, we didn't know if he'd talk or if he'd walk or anything. We didn't know if he was going to come to.
And I don't remember being in a hospital. It's all gone. But thinking about what my parents, my siblings went through, sitting next to my hospital bed. First they think son could be dead. Then he doesn't know who they are. And then I'm just a shell of who I am. Is everything gonna have to start over?
We assumed he's not gonna make it. It's gonna be brain damage. He's gonna need help forever. He's not gonna be the same.
They warned my family that I might be very vulgar and aggressive because of the head injury. It's apparently what happens. Here's my sweet mother that's next to my hospital bed day in and day out, and I wake up and I'm trying to pull all of these tubes out of my skull that are there to try to drain all the fluids. And my mom would try to stop me, and I'd be cussing her out, and she'd be saying, "Don't talk to me like that. You know, I'm your mom." And she's just so broken. And she tells me that I said, "You're not my fucking mom." I didn't recognize her. So I don't remember getting into that car. I don't remember that day or the day before. My last memory before the accident was 2 days before. And it's off. It's almost like your brain's designed to shut off at a certain amount of pain.
When he came home from the hospital, I went to cut his hair because they had shaved the site where they did the surgery. The next day I came to visit. He didn't even remember that I had been there. So that was really awful.
I would be so angry that I couldn't see any of my friends. And my mom goes, "Your friends all came and visited you yesterday." And then I would get angry at my parents. "Why didn't you tell me my friends were here? I want to see them." And they'd say, "You hung out with them all day." and I didn't remember it. Here you go from a guy that's 6'5" that loves playing every sport to a guy getting bathed by his mom in physiotherapy trying to raise my arm back up. Everything that you think you had was stripped from you. I was terrified to fall asleep at night. I lost the feeling in this arm, this hand, these fingers down the right side. It's all numb. It's just been tingling since the accident. When you no longer have feeling, suddenly you find out you've cut yourself open. You realize pain actually plays a role in life of letting you know something's wrong. And not just physically, but mentally.
Well, his collarbone was broken and all the muscles to his shoulders and the shoulder blade all the way around the back, the muscles were severed.
Clearly I hit my head on something, but I also got compacted this way where my right shoulder popped in, and it was so drawn in that if I tried to pull my arm back, my shoulder blade was rubbing against my spine. So one surgery, they had to cut out part of my shoulder blade. Then they tried to pull the shoulder out and put a metal rod in. When I got hit this way too, if you look at my x-ray, you can see a black line where the spine should be. Although I wasn't supposed to try to go back to high school, I just wanted some sense of normalcy. So I convinced my family, convinced the doctors that I could go back to school. Wherever I went, people would always ask me, how's the pain in your skull? And people weren't asking the important question. Because as bad as all the physical injuries were, what an event like that does to you, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, that was the real struggle. I felt so isolated, my identity was gone. And as we have a society that we're told not to express ourselves, that we shouldn't cry, especially as guys, suck it up, be a man. That's what I tried to do, and no one around me knew that I didn't want to be alive anymore. This was my old dorm room in high school. This is where I spent my nights, a place where I was supposed to be doing homework and hung out with my buddies. This is where I lived from grade 10 to grade 12. My best friend Ryan was laying in that bed and he was sitting beside me in that car accident. And coming back here, I just wanted to be normal again and be around friends. But we never talked about the accident, and everything you think you know about your future, your plans, is out the window. I convinced the doctors, my family, that I could come back, but I don't even remember those first weeks and even month and a half that I was here. I was able to open up to my mom at home about my fear of falling asleep, my fear of death. But here I just tried to pretend like nothing happened. I kept a little journal right under my bed, because when I woke up at night and my skull was in pain, my shoulder hurt, my back, I wouldn't remember what happened, and I didn't want special treatment, and I'd open it up and like, Rob, your head hurts because you were in a car accident. If anybody asks, you were hit by a semi-truck, you know, the reason you have no feeling in your arm is because of the nerve damage in your shoulder, your back hurts because, and it was just, I'd read this so that I could like prepare myself to just be normal and not look like a fool. I tried to challenge the math exam and I got 37.5. I'll never forget that. My mental capacity, my physical capacity. I wasn't supposed to go into the gym because a ball might hit me in the head. I didn't follow any of those rules. I didn't tell anyone that because I just didn't want anyone to treat me differently. And that fear of falling asleep is rooted in what you're taught growing up in a religious home. If I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Me and death have such an interesting relationship now. You know, it's so right here.
We go to such deep places, and people aren't always able to meet us in those deep places. But it certainly had an impact on him, and I didn't know. I didn't know.
After high school, I moved back home, back into the shelter, no longer with my friends, no longer able to listen to music that I love and have it cranked. Complete uncertainty of what I would do for a living, how I would support myself, how I could ever do anything. And that's when the darkness really set in. You lay in bed at night, your skull hurts, your shoulder hurts, your back hurts. They give you this medication for this pain, and this to fall asleep, and take this to wake up, take this for this nerve damage. Laying there and you can't sleep. And these dark thoughts are setting in. Why? Why stay? One of the most misunderstood things about mental illness is when people say that it's selfish when you take your life. So you're just taking your pain and giving it to other people. And although that happens, what people don't understand, if you've never been there, you are convinced that the most selfless thing you could do is leave. That is the greatest gift that you could give to your parents, to your family, to your friends. This world would be better without you. I remember smashing my fist through the door in my bedroom, back and forth, in a time where I knew nobody that was cutting, self-harming. I was able to control that pain. My focus was on my hand, not on this pain. And I was hoping somebody would see this and ask me, hey, what's up with your hand? Are you all right? So when people say to me, oh, you just cut yourself because you want attention, maybe you do. Maybe you need attention. Oh, that's just a cry for help. Maybe it is a cry for help. Maybe somebody is crying for help. And I do think my doctors had the right intentions. Hey, I'm having problems sleeping. Here, try this. It didn't work. Or you become tolerant. Here, try this. And you start with Tylenol 3. I got to a place where I'm on Percocet. And then you get a few a day, and you become tolerant. They give you a few more, and they up the doses. My doctor wanted to help me with my pain until the point where I was at 240 Percocet a month and 180 Oxy Neo. But the most common thing people would say to me is everything happens for a reason. I spent 2 years trying to find that reason until my brother-in-law walked up. He heard me dealing with this thought that everything happens for a reason. And he looks at me and he goes, you were hit by a semi-truck because you and your friends were going too fast on an icy road. Shit happens. What are you gonna do with it? And that sounds so simple, but that set me free. It wasn't fate. It wasn't God. I have control. I get to make decisions. Oh my goodness. 180. Why did I get a second chance? I don't know. There's something on me now. I gotta make something of this second chance. I'm done with this bitterness, this anger. I looked at the sky and I was like, what do you want from me? I'll do anything. And I thought I'd feel some voice inside of me telling me to move to Africa and build a well. And I would have done anything I heard. I heard it, not an audible voice, just a prompting. Phone the semi-driver that hit you and tell me you're okay. What? And I phoned the police, kept trying. Finally, when cop gave me his number, called the semi-driver. Remember that car accident up in Canada? Yeah, got real quiet. Just calling to tell you I'm okay, I made it. I survived. And he was really quiet. He said, I'm so sorry about your friend. I said, what friend? It was the guy that died and crushed his skull. I'm like, no, man, that's why I'm calling. That's me. And I could tell it set him free. But the key part of that story is not what happened to him. It's what happened to me. I had never done anything for anyone but myself till that day. I hung up that phone and I felt significant. I felt like I mattered to somebody other than me. Like those dark thoughts that make you think the world would be better without you disappeared. And it didn't take some massive undertaking. I made a phone call and I wanted more. I wanted to feel more of that. It became a new addiction for me. How could I do that? How could I experience that again? I started pouring my energy into playing music. I started jamming together with this guy We recorded some music together, we put a band together, we had even done a couple albums. We'd play these shows and I would look out to the audience hoping there'd be thousands of people there, and we were playing just small little clubs, just a few people at a time. And I'm like, where's the crowd? I want to share the story of what I've got to say, you know? And there was nobody there, but I didn't care if there was 4 people or 40,000. But I had such a great crew of guys as we were rehearsing together and writing music together, became my best friends. But even with them, I never told them anything about those dark thoughts, you know? So I'm back in Kleefeld, living with my parents, trying to figure out what to do. And then I hear about this radio station in Winnipeg, Freak 107. First met with the owner, Tom. What's the plan here? And he had sold his computer company and wanted to use music to reach young people that are struggling.
We had this guy apply for a job at the radio station and, you know, found out, first of all, he was a musician, really had no background or skill for radio, but there was something special about him. It didn't take long to figure out that he had exactly that same idea. You know, it's about significance. It's about helping other people, in particular helping young people, and ultimately using music to do that.
Interesting. Then I meet with Jarrett. He had a few different roles there, but basically the manager of the radio station.
My first impressions of Robb was that he was a very outgoing guy, had a very magnetic personality. Let's give him a shot on the air. That was a very comfortable place for Robb to be.
We started picking out songs that weren't just fluffy songs. Like if we want to get to somebody that's struggling, we got to pick out songs that are talking about addiction, talking about suicidal thoughts. We had to go there. We had to play Papa Roach. We had to play Nirvana. All the while, I started this band with my friends and we're playing music. We're recording stuff. So now my life is entrenched with my band, with Freak 107, with helping people. It was just, music became this whirlwind around me. Music and stories, music and stories.
We realized that we could really utilize Robb as sort of a torchbearer. What if we invested a significant amount of money into Robb's art, into his band?
Jarrett started meeting with some different people and got us connected. And all of a sudden I go from recording in small little studios in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I'm flown out to Vancouver, picked up at the airport, brought to a studio. Intimidating. Walking down the hallways, seeing all these records on the wall from artists that I adore, Gold Records and all this, sit in the studio with all these producers I've never met.
A label had approached us about producing a record with Robb, and he was, I guess, he was an artist on the come up. We didn't really know who he was, but our capacity was to try and help Robb realize his vision in terms of writing songs with him and making a mainstream rock radio record.
The melodies and lyrics, especially the lyrics, I noticed the lyrics took on more than just, you know, your typical pop rock song. I found that the writing process went along really, really well, and I was really proud of the songs we did. But then there were these other songs that touched on subjects that you don't normally hear in pop songs. And to me, those were the ones that really stood out.
I want to write a song about a homeless guy I met at a soup kitchen. And they look at each other, and I write a song called Hello Goodbye. That night, one of the guys is driving me to the hotel. He's like, Robb, that's cool that you got that off your chest, a song about a homeless person. But nobody on the radio wants to hear about homeless people. We need you to write hits.
There was a funny dance between what Robb wanted to say and how is that accessible. But if you look at great musical artists, they do have something to say. It's not just all about, you know, a love song, which can be great, or like Let's Have a Party, which can also be great, but there was more substance. We made this record and we were feeling really, really good about it.
You never know when you finish a project what potential it has, or you're hoping. It's almost like letting your child out into the real world, you know? You've raised it as best as you can and you just kind of put it out there and hope it does well.
Day after day I fought to write songs about things that mattered to me that ended up being in the top 10 in Canada.
Alive and well and racing up the Canadian charts, it's Winnipeg Band live on arrival.
But I'll never forget being in Kitchener, Ontario. The song's called Hello Goodbye, and you hear the crowd start screaming. And you can actually hear me saying, "You guys know this song?"
And the song is called Hello Goodbye, and this is this man's story. You know the song, do you?
And then you can hear the crowd singing along. They flew out the management of all the big radio stations in Canada, flew them out to Vancouver. I'm backstage at this private club, and they said, "Rob, we're gonna introduce you. All those radio guys are out there, just give them a wave and come backstage." I'm like, "Yeah, no problem." So they're like, "Here he is, the man who came back from the dead, Robb Nash." And I walk out, and all these guys are cheering, and as I walk out on stage, they've got these nurses in like sexy nurse outfits dancing around me. I had no idea this was gonna happen, and I'm thinking, what is going on here? And everybody's cheering, and then I realized, oh, my car accident is a gimmick. And I came backstage, I'm like, what was that? And they're like, "We know what we're doing. Trust us, right?" I'm like, haha. My family trying to understand what happened and what we were doing.
The family took Rob's career into music as bad because we grew up in a gospel home and singing gospel music. His music was looked at as bad, including myself. I told him he was wrong. I told him what he was doing was wrong.
I wanted nothing more than for my family, my parents to be proud of me, you know? Craved it since I was a kid. I think we all do.
I thought I was being righteous. I thought I was doing the right thing.
I knew the way that some of my family members looked at me. Some of them wouldn't hear me out, just where I could even explain what we were trying to accomplish. And it stung. But in the midst of it, I realized the strength you need to do what you're supposed to do, to follow those promptings, that comes from within.
There was certainly a buzz going on in the industry, and we were like, this is starting to work. This is starting to work. And no matter how much success you have or haven't had, when things start to work, that's special. That's not normal.
And before we knew it, you know, we had 3 top 10 hits on the radio, tons of spins happening across Canada on the radio station.
We started to hear these songs on the radio, and that is always exciting because no matter how hard we try, that's a little elusive. They started opening for acts that you would recognize the names of these acts, and it was really, really growing. And
people were starting to recognize Robb, the band. There was talks of him being promoted to South America, to the United States, to Asia. There was really talks of growing Robb's brand globally.
As an artist, you make the album, you put out a song, you promote it, you go on tour, and the trajectory is hopefully to become this big star and have success and make more albums. But everyone's path is different.
We were on a club tour. We got called by a promoter from out east in the Maritimes, and he's like, he wants to bring us out to perform. We had songs in the top 10. We're like, this seemed like a no-brainer, and there wasn't much advertising about the shows. The first couple shows were kind of quiet. And then Jared had this idea. It's like, hey, why don't we get you to go tell your story to high school and tell everybody, hey, we're in town and we're playing a show, right? But I went to the high school, just me and my acoustic guitar, but all of a sudden I'm sitting in a gym telling my story, doing an acoustic version of my song. Well, that was kind of cool. Like, that allows me to break away from just crowd surfing and mosh pits and people singing along. And it was just this aha moment. And we knew something, in that moment, a seed was planted, and we were going to come back to that at some point. You start touring, and it can be pretty draining. You know, you play your concert, you're also supposed to be at this after party, and you travel a lot. Touring Canada means you're driving 10 hours to the next city for the most part. I'm still struggling with pain. They're still up in my doses with painkillers, you know, and still struggling with all that, going in elevation in the mountains, you know, season changes with the metal in my skull and my chest, and I don't think anybody around me knew how much of a struggle I was still in the midst of when it came to addiction. We're getting ready to work on our live shows so we could fly to LA and do the showcase. And we did this final prep. We performed at the Roxy in Vancouver, and we had a celebration backstage. You guys are ready. We're gonna go for this big showcase. So we're about to go down to the States. Same thing. There's gonna be nurses dancing around me. And I saw how much time and energy and finances that it took to just scratch the surface in Canada. Now we're gonna try to do that in the States? We're gonna try to go over the seas with this stuff? I'm thinking, how much time and energy is this gonna take? And Tom had invested all this money, and he was still hoping to get it back from album sales? What are we doing here? This isn't what I wanted to be known as, right? And I was just frozen thinking, how am I gonna take this and do something with it that's meaningful, that matters, right? And then I got a call with this offer. It's going through schools, telling my story. 9-month tour. So I talked to my wife. I said, I think it's time to walk away. Shook hands with Jarrett, went to Tom, said, I think I should do this tour. And I'm not gonna lie, part of me thought we'd all go arm in arm and we'd go do it together. We shook hands, we all kind of parted ways.
When Robb decided that he wanted to walk away from his record deal, really we're not, offended or taken aback by it.
You could tell that Live and Arrival was done. There wasn't going to be another album, and
it kind of just petered out, and it was hard to understand why, and that was disappointing.
It was just time for me to go. And I refinanced my home, and I started booking flights, going from school to school. And I got a taste of something so wonderful.
He tore up his record contract. Like, who does that?
How unusual is it to walk away? That was brave. That was crazy. It was crazy.
Your song's no longer on the radio? Oh, like, you just walk away from this all? That's so sacrificial. It didn't feel like a sacrifice for a second. After that 9 months, I'm like, now what? But schools kept calling, saying, can you come back? Or other schools and communities would say, we heard about you. Can you come to our school, to our community? And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, there's not just classrooms or small groups. Now it was like full gymnasium. So I bring my old guitar player back, and then I offer my old drummer to come back, and he's like, no, I think we're good. So I call on John Holiday.
Robb and I kind of knew each other growing up in the Winnipeg music scene. My band had played with his band over the years. We went for coffee and to discuss kind of the project. And at that point, I'd kind of quit music for a while. So when he called and said, hey, I want you to come play drums, it's like, I'm just kind of done with that. I'm done with the music industry. There was just something about him from the get-go where I was like, okay, this seems different than any other musical project that I had done before. And so it was enough to at least get me to say yes to that first show in Thunder Bay.
Afterwards, he goes, do you do that at every show? I'm like, do what? Where you would tell stories in between and stuff? I'm like, yeah. He goes, I want to be a part of this.
And then we did another show in Okotoks, Alberta. And at the time, there was a bass player playing with us that had gone through some addiction struggles. And one of the videos in the show was his video. And I just remember being on stage, and it just hit me, the emotion of his story and seeing him beside me on stage. That's where it just clicked, where it's like, okay, let's do this. And I remember getting into the van after that show, and I was just like, okay, Robb, I'm ready to go. Let's do this. And I remember just being so excited.
But sorry, man, like, I didn't have a sound system. Normally I was just going to schools, me and a guitar, small groups. And he looked at me and said, I don't care if you need drums or not, I'll come along and wrap your cables. I just want to be a part of this thing. That was a good answer. Like, he was there for the right reasons. And then the show started getting bigger, and we got called to more gyms, and it was pretty amazing to watch as the demand for what we were doing was starting to happen from coast to coast.
I met Robb when I was 15. They played a show at my school.
I met Robb Nash when I was in the youth institution in 2015.
He was doing a performance with his very small band. I was really obsessed with the music. It was like super cool because we never have like rock shows coming in. It's mostly like these random talks that the students don't really care about.
I didn't really care much to know about it. It was a way to get out of class for me.
And I really wanted to figure out, was I causing more damage than good by talking about these things? And I met somebody named Shirley Steinberg, child psychologist.
At first, I had no idea who he was. I hadn't heard of him, and I was immediately engaged and just couldn't believe this guy existed.
And I asked her, can you come watch a few of our shows, tell me if what I'm doing is valuable to this fight? I was nervous. You know, what if she would tell me that my approach was all wrong, that it's true what some people were worried about, that I wasn't qualified?
Of course, when you see Rob the first time, you're kind of blown away. You're blown away by the look, and you see all these tats. But then he doesn't walk with that feel of what he's wearing. He doesn't strut, or there's no machismo about him. But that's not what even draws one in. It's just Rob and his incredible, authentic way of being.
And she was like, where did you learn this stuff? I don't know, it's just, I don't always just go with this, just go with here, you know? Stuff that resonates in my life seems to be working with other people.
You feel this spirit, this vibe from him throughout the room, and it can be a huge room. And all of a sudden there's shushing, and people are starting to listen, or they'll start to record him with their phone.
Just to hear somebody with the credentials to say, yeah, this works. This is so valuable. This opens the door. You know, there's no safe way to handle these difficult topics. And the moment you try to sanitize it and make it safe, this is just not safe work.
The denouement is when it's over and he's done, and you know they're so tired, especially when he has the full band. And then all of a sudden you'll see 50, 100, 150 kids lined up on both sides of the gymnasium, waiting to meet Rob.
In working in child welfare over the 35 years, I see a lot of pain. We've lost young people. We've lost a lot of them. And we lose a lot of them in our Indigenous communities where there is no hope. I recall sitting in the audience and hearing the story, and it wasn't just the story that Rob was telling, it was feeling the energies in the room. And I thought, this is something really special. This man has been given a gift.
You know, when we started reaching out to the Indigenous communities, I just got this feeling those first few times. It's like, what's the catch here? Was this a publicity stunt? Are you trying to make some money here? What is this all about? And it took a little while for them to see that this was genuine, that we truly did care. And I don't have Indigenous blood in me. And yet they so embraced me that they gave me my spirit name. Not only did they call me Bear, they call me Bear Chief because of the protection that I try to help provide for them. And I say it at every show, it's the greatest honor I've been given out of all the awards I've gotten. So proud of it that I actually tattooed that on my hand with a bear head on my hand with Chief across the fingers. And I show that at every show that we perform at.
When he would talk to a young person or they would talk to him, it didn't matter if there were 30 young people around him. He was focused and honed in right on that one individual young person that was talking to him. And he was so attentive as they were speaking that they felt that special attention that they were so longing for.
I never really accepted myself when I was going through depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. I had moments where I'd sit in my room for hours at a time just looking at a bottle of pills I have next to my bed, staring at it, wondering like if I'm worth anything today, if I'm needed, if I'm wanted, if I'm loved.
I was bullied pretty much just for my appearance. It was because I was Native. It didn't matter what school I went to. I actually went to several different elementaries growing up, and I was bullied in each and every one of them. And at first, it was just how any kind of bully would start. It would just be words, and then it would actually be getting more violent to where I was attacked after school on my walk home. I was in the Manitoba Youth Center for assault with a deadly weapon, uttering threats, conspiracy to commit murder ×5, and attempted murder.
I ended up getting into a really bad situation where my life completely turned for the worst. And it all had to do with me getting sexually assaulted.
I met Rob for the first time at Hall Services when I was 17 years old. I tried to commit suicide because I had been raped the night before. And so I went down to the train tracks, and this was late at night, like there was nobody out there. And I just laid there. I prayed for the first time in a very long time. And I'm like, Lord, if there is any reason for me to be alive right now, please send me a sign. And within like minutes, this lady comes up to me and she's like, get your ass up off those train tracks. And I was like, no, I'm clearly trying to kill myself, leave me alone. And she annoyed me to the point where I got off. I was put into the treatment facility. They told me that Robb Nash was coming. And so he comes in and he starts talking about his story, and I start to listen and pay attention, and then they start playing music. They played Troubled Child, and I was just rocked by it.
Troubled Child is a song that we've worked on a few times, actually. It's called To an Alternative School. It's usually kids that don't fit the program at schools, maybe a little edgy. We were called in to work with some of these rough kids, and I said, I want to hear your stories. You've heard mine, and they all wrote out their stories. And there was this theme where they all said in this, all my life I've been told I'm the troubled child. I was like, well, why don't we write a song together? Who here wants to write the words with me? And some of them raised their hands. We're like, cool, we'll write the words together, because they loved writing poetry. Who wants to learn drums? Some of them raised their hands, so we brought them to the music store, and we got a drum set donated and taught them how to play drums. How about guitar, ukulele, piano? We're showing them all the pieces. We brought them to the studio and showed them the recording process. Who likes to work on the soundboard? It's like, anybody want to learn photography? We were trying to show them all the different aspects of making an album, whether it's singing, playing guitar, the photography, the album design. You'll see this transformation by the end of the song. You'll see the smiles in their faces when they got the chance to express what they've dealt with through their whole life, and they see somebody believe in them, and they get to be a part of that process. What a lot of people think you're supposed to do is walk in and tell people what they're supposed to change in their life. It's what religion has often done. It's what counselors have often done. I will tell you what you need to change. It's like, no, I'm not trying to change you. I'm trying to make you okay with who you are.
He was like the first person who told me I was gifted and not broken. And he was the first man who gave me any sort of validation that wasn't sexual. He really, truly cared about me. It wasn't anything I could give to him. He genuinely gave crap. And for someone who's been abused their whole life, that's a big deal.
I was at a rough school in Vancouver, and I was like, oh, this isn't far away from the studio where we recorded our big Live on Arrival album. Maybe I should pop in there.
We weren't in direct contact with Robb until he came walking into the studio one day, and there was 4 of us there who had worked on the record, and he came walking in and said, I'm doing something completely different now. Like, why would you be doing that? You know, that made no sense. Like, it was going perfectly. And he told us that he was doing a small show, and it was just him and his guitar, and he felt like it gave him a platform to say a few things that were really important.
We saw his new show. He was performing at a high school, and he asked us to come out.
He was talking to young people about making better decisions, and that's a really corny thing to talk about. But Robb was able to frame it in a way that got me really excited about what he was saying.
The crowd was totally mesmerized, and looking around the room, I saw tears. I had tears in my eyes, and
I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know where it was going, but I knew that there was something there that I wanted to be a part of.
I realized at that point, I need to be a part of this.
When I would get in front of those audiences in schools, the last thing I wanted them to know was how dark it really got. If I were to reveal that compelling story of a car accident brought me down to this place of suicidal ideation, well, then I'm revealing a weakness, is what I was thinking. What am I saying then? If you go through some tragedy like I did, it might bring you to that dark place. Am I encouraging you to go there? I was terrified, and I didn't want to cause more harm. Then we get a call. We've heard about your effectiveness with working with schools. We're in the midst of a tragedy. We need help now. We had a suicide. And on the suicide note of this girl, it was revealed that she had a suicide pact with one of her friends. If you kill yourself, I'll kill myself. Principal says, we don't know who it is. Can you come right away? What do you do in that moment? Well, our flights are this, our hotels are this. I mean, it's like, no, we'll be right there. We'll figure it out later. We get there. Let's say there's 700, 1,000 students sitting in front of me. and you're looking across the crowd as you're talking. Someone in here is about to take their life. I don't know where they're sitting. I don't know who they are. And I know this prompting is in me. I gotta open up that I was there once myself. I am shaking inside. I know what I have to say. What are the students gonna think of me? What are the staff gonna think of me? What is my team gonna think of me? This could be the end of the tour. The respect that my own band has for me is gonna be gone. The respect from the students. Would any staff member ever want me back? What if this spreads that Robb was weak, that he was suicidal? I can't say it, but I know I have to. And it's leading to this moment in the show, and I'm about to say it for the first time to anyone in front of 1,000 strangers. I said, I know somebody in this room is thinking about taking their life. You're not alone. I was there once too. It was like 1,000 pounds off of me. It was like, I thought I would lose my platform because of expressing what I had dealt with. And afterwards, I'm having conversations with my bandmates, with teachers, with students walking up, giving me a hug. It's like, thank you so much. This very thing that I thought was gonna be my end brought the relationship between me and my audience and my team to a whole new level. And I'm getting hugs, and this vulnerability felt so good. And then this girl's standing in front of me, and she pulls a note out of pocket, and she's like, here. What is this? It's an old crinkled up paper. What is this? It's my suicide note. What? It's my suicide note. I was gonna kill myself this weekend. I don't need this anymore. And the principal and school counselor are standing next to me. That's why they brought me there. Could we find her? And now she walks off with the staff to go get the help that she needs. I'm like, what just happened? I don't understand. When did she write this note? Why was it with her? When I spoke to somebody, some police, I said, why was this note on her? It was crumpled up. Like, that wasn't freshly written. And this police officer that works a lot with suicide prevention among teens said, yeah, very rarely is the note freshly written. People write their note and they carry it with them, usually 2-3 months before they take their life, waiting for somebody to push them over the edge, or waiting for somebody to reach out and say something that lets them know they're not alone, that they have value.
This note is sitting in a kid's pocket for 2 to 3 months, and they take, in an hour, take it out, rip it up. It's tough to talk about, but
So the next day, there's another 1,000 students in front of me, and looking at the stats based on what Kids Help Phone has found in Canada, 1 in 5 teenagers pre-COVID had seriously considered suicide in the last 12 months. 1 in 5. So now I've got another 1,000 students in front of me. Second time was a lot easier. I know somebody in this audience is thinking about taking their life. You're not alone. I was there once too. And a young man comes up to me, pulls a note out of her pocket, hands it to me, walks off with a school counselor. I'm like, this is a thing. This is now my focus.
I did write a suicide note. I did keep it on me for months at a time. I did have it in my jacket pocket. I did keep it with me.
I didn't think I fit in with the world. I didn't think I had a sense of belonging anywhere, wherever I went. I would hear it every night that I wasn't worth it, and that the world doesn't need you anymore. It took me to a point where I was ready to just go.
I always carried around this little pink booklet that I got from the store in Wollaston, and I carried it around, and I had written so many horrible things about myself in that book. It was my suicide book. I written over 100 pages of things I hated about myself and what I wanted people to do with my stuff after I died.
I didn't talk to my parents because I felt like they would say something along the lines of, get over it, or why don't you do something about it?
I didn't understand why I wasn't feeling any love from my own parents. There was a lot of resentment that I had put back onto them for a lot of years. Maybe I wasn't worth anything anymore if, you know, my mom didn't even want me anymore.
At that point, I was already, you know, dealing with anxiety and depression. I was on medication for a few years at that point already. But I was just angry too at everything. You know, my parents were separated. I was going back and forth between houses. There was different forms of abuse. I was just angry at everybody.
It's hard to figure out what my role is in all of this. I'm not a counselor, I'm not a psychologist, I have no education. I'm a storyteller. But as we've toured, what was supposed to be a 9-month tour has been 10 years. Talking with hundreds of thousands of teenagers, finding patterns of what stories work, what songs work, what lyrics work, what jokes work.
All right, how many of you guys are happy that you don't have to be in class right now? Yeah! Yeah! So somebody asked if I do this one, see if you guys recognize it, okay? See, what's going on there? Just playing the guitar, are we? Just playing the G chord. Anybody? Stewie, all right. You guys know Family Guy? If you've never heard my story before, you got a glimpse of that video. But when I was 17 years old, I was in this car accident.
When Rob goes into a school, he's got this innate ability to connect with people. But specifically with youth, it's nothing short of magical.
The astounding fact that he pays personal attention to each kid. It's engagement, what's your name, tell me your story.
The light bulb moment for me was when he said, don't give up. You know, you can hear it from a lot of people, but when somebody like Rob, who's been through a lot, says it, you know it's coming from the heart, and it's not just some mind game. Don't give up at all.
I was frozen. I was just like staring at the stage, at what was going on. It was just a big wave of emotions because I hadn't been expecting the show to be what it was.
We don't look like a normal, you know, say a school counselor. That imagery of tattoos and rock music, as much as it might seem superficial, it's not what kids are used to. Everything we talk about is very real and very much from the heart and very much from our own experiences. So I think we're constantly pulling from that, pulling from our own journals and memories and things like that. So it's very real for us, for sure.
When 1 in 5 teenagers is suicidal, you're trying to get to their hearts, but you're also trying to entertain the other 80% of the crowd. That's a tough balance. So we put on a concert, we tell jokes, we play music, we show videos. But the goal is to get to that kid. It's on the brink.
I don't know why we came here today. I don't. Not yet. But after every show, somebody writes us online or they'll send us a letter and say, man, you came for me. It was like you were talking right to me. It's exactly what I needed to hear, but we don't know where you're sitting. I know some of you are just happy to get out of class right now, but somebody sitting here is going, I'll tell you why you came here, man. You came for me. It's like you're talking right to me. It's exactly what I need to hear.
And in 10 years, 917 kids gave us their suicide notes. Why aren't we telling those stories? I can show you countless videos on YouTube of students that have gone home after our shows and ripped up their suicide notes, got rid of their razor blades. Those stories don't make it on air.
Got thrown in the trash. The suicide note got thrown in the garbage. I got home later than usual that day because the guidance counselor kept me at school. But once I got home, it was under my mattress, and I was like, I'm gonna get rid of this thing. I don't really need it anymore.
One day I was back in Winnipeg, and I called Tom and I said, remember that tour that I was on? I'm still going. Do you want to come see it?
We were still very connected from a heart perspective. That never, ever stopped.
Do you need help with anything? I said, well, it's tough because I don't have my charitable status, so I can't even take donations for what we do, you know? So he started to help me with lawyers and paperwork, putting together a board of directors and giving me advice, and suddenly he was back linked up with me.
The way to fund this is not by charging schools. That's not going to work. When there was a need, we didn't ask for money, we just went.
When you start doing that stuff, it's pretty terrifying. But when you start just walking that out every day, it actually becomes just more like a rush. I wondered what's gonna happen this week. Well, once word started spreading, we could not meet the demand anymore. From September to July, we were doing a show in the morning at one school. My crew would tear down the stage, guitars, the drums, the lights. They'd pack up, they'd head over to another school while I was talking with students after the show. And they'd get me over to the next school and I'd walk in as the intro was playing at the next school. We were doing that 2, sometimes 3 shows a day. It was starting to affect my mental health.
We know that Robb is burning out, for lack of a better term, and we had to find some way of not stopping, but yet saving Robb, if you only like saving him from himself almost. He couldn't stop either, really.
We have to say no, almost feeling, guilty for starting to kind of push that and be like, no, we can't do, he's gonna die at some point, literally, this is life and death.
I don't mind seeing somebody in front of me sharing their heart with me, as long as I know that it's just not the next hour that are gonna feel better. That was what really drained me. Does it all go back to 0 tomorrow? Maybe they feel filled up after a concert, but is it gonna last? And it was 2.5, 3 years before I started getting messages on social media saying, hey, I saw you 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. Want you to know I haven't been cut since that day. I've been clean since that day. I've been seeing a counselor. I got the help that I needed. Hearing this stuff, reading suicide notes, it can be overwhelming. But a key for me is when I realize those are not tears of somebody breaking down. Those are tears of somebody breaking through. That razor blade handed to me is not going into somebody's arm anymore. That suicide note is not being read by a parent.
I remember being in Toronto, one of the first weeks of tour and just, having to pull over the van, because he had to throw up just out of nowhere, the physical pain.
I would get home and I'd be so exhausted, not being able to be a good husband when I got home and a good dad, but I wasn't even being healthy myself, spending so much of my energy trying to help other people that it was beginning to be unhealthy for me.
And he did such a good job, maybe too good of a job of sort of hiding what he was all dealing with. But as kind of year after year of 150 shows, I think we started realizing what was happening as far as how much it was affecting him physically. Robb just couldn't say no, bless his heart. And it just, I'd start to look at this and be like, we have to say no.
It becomes an addiction trying to help other people. And I almost burnt out completely and would have had to quit.
I remember some shows where he would get through his talk and there'd be a video splitter segment and he would leave his chair, go backstage, and I'd be on stage sitting at my drum kit, hearing him throwing up. He'd come back on somehow, nothing short of a miracle. He'd come back on stage and finish his talk, go into that song, and then still taking the time to talk to these kids, and to the point where he could barely walk onto the bus after the show. And so it was always this balance of helping people, but what is it doing to Robb? And we're gonna get to a point where we can't reach anyone.
How do we do it in a way that protects him, like physically, emotionally? How does it protect his family? Yet, how do we reach these kids? 2% of 3.3 million is 66,000 young people attempt to take their lives. You got to do something about that.
The demand was getting so huge that I knew we needed to take it and make some changes, and I couldn't do it myself, so that's when I called Jared back.
This tour that had been going on for 6 years of going to 150 schools in a school year. This is when they were starting to explore consolidating schools together and creating more what we would call a super show. So bringing schools into a theater.
Instead of kids having to sit on their gym floor, go set up in a nice big theater, bring in 10 schools, get to that many more people. There was only one issue. The school says, we don't have a budget for this. We can't afford to come. Well, it's free. We can't afford the school buses. If money is the only thing that's stopping this from happening, we got to pay for the school buses. So we'd pay for the venue, we'd pay for the lights, the sound, everything, security, ushers, insurance, school buses. We'd fly in kids from reserves because there's no funding for mental health initiatives in schools. The new album we have is called This Is War. It talks about us going to the front lines trying to get these people that everybody else has given up on.
When I first met Rob, I was a teenager. I was planning on taking my own life. He showed me that there's life beyond that point.
I volunteered for the first time at the Robb Nash Project show here in Calgary. Being a small part of a show, it was just a sense of fulfillment.
I put more effort into school. I graduated college. Now I have a good career.
If I never crossed paths with Rob, I honestly think I would be dead.
I was born without my left hand. I'm a below the elbow amputee, and I know when I was younger, I really didn't accept myself.
I was like, do you like painting, dancing, music, anything? He goes, I love music. I'm like, if you could play any instrument, what would you play? Guitar. I'm like, you gotta play guitar then. I believe we watched a video of a kid that I saw online. He plays drums with 2 elbows. He just tapes the drumsticks to his elbows and he's fantastic. And you plant those seeds with a kid like Dylan, but they have to take that seed and water it and let it grow.
I was, I think, a week after the show, roughly, and I was sitting there in my bed just looking at that guitar hanging in my case there, just sitting there. Darn, I'm just gonna pick it up. I'm gonna see what I can do with it, and I become more and more open about myself, more and more open about depression and suicide. This is because he pushed me. This is because I heard that message, because it clicked in my head that I'm gonna be fine. I'm gonna be a-okay. It was something more spiritual on the inside, something I felt within me, within my heart, within my soul, within who I am.
It's 2.5 years later, he's 17 years old, and he sends an email to our website and says, thank you. Here's a video of me performing. That boy, at 17 years old, playing for 2.5 years, was playing as good or better than me. I promise you this, that when we go back on stage, that boy is gonna join our crew, but not so that he can be Robb Nash as a guitar player for the rest of his life. I think he's gonna go out and do bigger things than I've ever done. I don't think I'm the next Bono. I don't think I'm gonna be the next big thing. I think at least one of these kids that we meet on this tour will be. If I can be a small part of helping them launch. The amount of times somebody tags us in a photo of burning their note, ripping up on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. I don't need this anymore. You see them rip it up. And we show those videos on the LED wall behind us from stage, and people look and say, okay, not everybody with issues with their mental health end up with suicide. Not every story of addiction ends in an overdose. I want to be like that girl right there. I want to rip up my note. I'm worth fighting for. And then I can fight for others like me. The amount of these young people that started sending us pictures of the lyrics that they've tattooed on our arms, a quote from stage, or a song that I wrote in my home studio is tattooed on somebody's arm. It's a part of their life.
Just for today, I need to reach out. Just for today, I need to ask for help. Just for today, I will make today count. And I actually have that lyric tattooed on my arm. I look at that tattoo and I'm like, just for today, I will do what I need to do for myself to get through to tomorrow.
I didn't know what to do with that. I had to do something, and I looked at all these suicide notes, and some just had names, some had signatures, and I took those signatures and some of the names, and I tattooed them on my arms. These are names of people that are part of me.
Okay, he's my inspiration, but now I'm getting the vibe that now I'm his inspiration.
A lot of my family, at first didn't understand, and looking at the music that I played and the way I dressed and covered in tattoos, and I've never tried to justify myself to any of them. I'm confident that I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to do, and I know why I'm here.
It's so amazing to me. And he makes such a big impact in my life that I share my story, but I say it's thanks to Robb. If it wasn't for Robb, I wouldn't be here.
When I first started tattooing Robb, asking about all the names, it opened up a dark past, dark time in my life. After sharing with it, he said, pick a spot and write your name. Pretty cool moment.
Went to a school, a Catholic middle school, where they lost an 11-year-old girl. And they showed me a picture. And here's this beautiful little girl with pigtails, you know. And it's just not right, and it's getting younger and younger. They learn from each other, and they need examples of these people that are still here. These will be the last names that I'm gonna tattoo on my arms. It's because I never want somebody to give me their suicide note with the goal of having their name on my arm. I could cover my entire body with the names of people I haven't been able to help. By the time I land in the next city, there's another tragedy, there's another suicide. It's easy to focus on that stuff. We've worked closely with schools that have just been through tragedy. I've had to sing and speak at way too many funerals. I've sat down with the parents that have just lost their kid.
I was the last one to talk to him on the phone. I walked up the stairs. As soon as I got to the top, I looked over and I could see his long legs sticking out. I ran up to him. I felt his tummy. It was cold.
And some of those families have partnered with us, sharing their stories, hoping that it could help someone else.
I want it to stop. I don't want to hear about this anymore, Robb. I want to see you pull those notes out of your pocket and you show them to me. I couldn't save him. I want to save other people. I want to help. And I know you're gonna do that.
This happens all the time on radio, TV interviews. I'm always asked about the most recent suicide. You know, how do you feel about this suicide or that overdose? I'm like, oh, it's tragic. I think we could learn from it, but I wish you'd stop talking about it. I'm like, what do you mean? Look, people don't get the finality in that decision because the person can live on through the media. And yeah, we can learn from their story, but we need to balance those stories of victory and triumph.
The difficulty and challenges of the mental health space is that it can be a real ugly and nasty place. Not many people want to go into the darkness. For the most part, society doesn't want to know the truth about that darkness.
It was my suicide book. I carried it around. After years of having it with me, I decided that I would start ripping out pages of if I felt better about myself. When I started to accept myself more and more, I would rip out a single page, and day after day I started ripping out more and more pages, and then I was on my first page. And so I took that one, burned it up with the rest of the book, and then I felt relieved. I felt stress-free. I felt better about myself. I wasn't worried about anything. I was relieved after I burned up the book.
When I start to get depressed nowadays, I don't get as bad as I used to. Sometimes I do think about Robb and his music. Sometimes I just play his music. Or sometimes I look at the scars on my arm. I can keep going.
During our concerts, I talk about people we've met on this tour that had eating disorder, addiction issues, that were bipolar, that were suicidal. And I'll say, do you want to meet them? And they walk out on stage and they perform with us.
He invited me to do Calgary Saddle Dome, 26,000 people. It was insane. And I've got the courage now to share with people. It's hard, this isn't easy, but I do it because someone out there needs to hear it.
I am 100% convinced people that work with their creativity, entrepreneurs, people that are artists that love to journal, express themselves, there's a weird connection between the arts and mental illness. I'm an artist. And when I didn't know how to channel that art into music, it overwhelmed me and I almost killed myself. When I got to express it, even if those thoughts were dark, I got them out of here into a song, onto a paper. And that's all it was at first, just a release. When I meet people, it's like, channel it. So much of our teaching around mental health is, take this, it'll make you normal. And I'm not always against medication. But what we teach is, channel it, don't shut it off.
When you go to one of his shows in Winnipeg, the first gal who gave him a suicide note, she's organizing volunteers for the team. She is on the team helping. These people who made decisions, it's still real in their life today. That impact has lasted.
He helped me save my life. He made me believe in myself when no one did. I just thought I was a bad kid and I wasn't ever going to amount to anything because I was always told that. My life has changed immensely since meeting Robb. I always thought I would be like a hooker on the street. I never thought I'd have a kid. I have a beautiful baby boy now. I have my own place. I take care of my own bills. And I wake up every morning, I look at myself in the mirror and I say, today, you can do this.
He tells it like it is, you know. He uses their words. There's just no bullshit. And even as he talks to them, they can tell that he loves them. I mean, he doesn't know them personally, but you can tell that he loves them. That spirit goes out and just emanates out from him. And it's a gift that he's been given, and he uses it.
When he came to me after I had crucified him, and it was years after, but he came to me and told me how proud he was of me. And I couldn't handle that because nobody was proud of me. I'd made bad choices. I have made more bad choices than good ones. I then checked what he was doing, and I started paying attention to what he was doing. I'm the guy that was against the tattoos and all these things. I went out and got a tattoo of Robb Nash on my arm. And to this very day, he's the one I look up to. I'm proud of that boy.
We had a good measure of commercial success, but my work with Robb means something really different. I get to wake up in the morning and feel like I'm contributing to something that means more than commercial success.
Now I'm looking at the audience, and I can actually see their reaction to what Robb is saying. I see them laugh, I see them cry. If you see the show, it takes you on quite a journey.
It's heavy, like there's real weight there, and we cry sometimes, and that's a odd picture, but man, some of these stories are tough. But Robb can be spent and crying over a story, but somehow that still feels good because we're hopefully helping someone turn a corner.
Sometimes if I'm having a bad day, those dark thoughts can creep in sometimes. Mental health is like physical health. There's days you feel good and days you don't. And I look down at these names and it reminds me why I keep going. And my story matters, just like the stories of every person tattooed on these arms. And sometimes you sit down on a flight and people look at these names. I'm 6'5" walking onto a plane with me and my crew, and you can sometimes see people going, oh, I hope he doesn't sit by me. I hope he doesn't sit by me. And you sit down and you can see they're looking at the names on the arms and they're starting to imagine what the names might be. And sometimes I'll toy with it a little bit for a few minutes where they say, can I ask about the names on your arm? And I'll just say, you don't want to know. And just let it hang there for a couple minutes before I start explaining. I love showing young men that you can be full of edginess on the outside, covered in tattoos. You can be rough and rugged and still be full of love and compassion on the inside.
I hope to be a touring musician. I hope to drive around little communities or big cities and talk about my message and help young people open up about themselves.
I don't think bad things happen for a reason. I think they happen with potential. Like my car accident had the potential to leave me angry, bitter, suicidal for the rest of my life. Or there's the potential that I could take my story, try to turn it around, and help other people with it.
He's got this amazing gift of love. Like, he's got so much love that he can't contain it. And he just has to find those people who need it. And I was one of those people.
And I'm just so glad that even though it took a while, I started to see a shift. As even my parents, who live in this conservative small town in a condo with elderly people that would say, "Hey, is your son Robb Nash?" And yeah, can you thank him? He helped my granddaughter out. She was really struggling. Dad became a fan again in his last few years. Although he had earplugs in, he even came to some of my concerts. I have many regrets in my life, many mistakes I've made, things I wish I could take back. Walking away from what most people think is success and music career is not one of those regrets. I try to remind myself every day that today I'm either gonna learn something or I'm gonna teach something. Every day should count, because you don't know if you have another one.
Please welcome Robb Nash.
I was alone, didn't pick up my phone, so you ran up to my room. The door was locked and you didn't know what to do. Sirens filled the town and that's when you fell back down. You looked at my note and this is what it said. If you're reading this, I'm sorry that I've hurt you. If you're reading this, I'm sorry for the pain you caused. If you're reading this and I'm not there beside you, here's a note, but there's so much more to say. I never belonged, I never fit in. I wanted to pierce my lip, change my skin, 'cause I don't know who I am. It's not that I wanted to die, I just don't wanna feel this way. I wrote you a note, and this is what it said. If you're reading this, I'm sorry that I've hurt you. If you're reading this, I'm sorry for the pain you caused. If you're reading this and I'm not there beside you, here's a note, but there's so much more to say. You may not understand my sorrow, but please stand beside me, even just to hear me say, if you're reading this, I'm sorry that I've hurt you. When you're reading